One of the key elements we had to address in the International Space Station was how to share operations and utilization. And a big part of that was how to value all of the contributions of the partners. Now, in the early round of negotiations with the original partners, Canada, Europe, and Japan, the decision was made, an agreement was reached to value essentially the on-orbit elements. So that didn't include transportation. It included just those things that were to be launched to orbit. And there were allocations of percentages based on those contributions. And those allocations were used to determine what kind of crew time was available, how often you had a national from your country who could fly on the station. It also determined your cost obligations for operating the space station. That took a lot of work, but once the decision was made on the percentages, those were documented in the agreement. So that's what we started with when I came in to renegotiate the agreements, and we had to bring Russia in. So the initial approach was to try and value the Russian on-orbit elements the same way we had valued the partner elements. Now, it was not a very detailed, precise formula. And it was subject of a lot of negotiations in the original round, so there's no way to just easily apply a formula to these new elements. But the Russians had a counter to almost any way that we proposed to value their elements. So if we wanted to value it based on volume or mass, they would say, well, let's multiply it times, say, 2, because our elements are going up early, they're going to be up longer, therefore they're of more value, they should be worth more. And essentially, we went back and forth repeatedly with proposal and counterproposal and could never agree how to value their elements. And we pushed this really hard because it was a single integrated facility. We wanted to operate it as such. We wanted to fully integrate the Russians into this program. Eventually, we came around to an approach called Keep What You Bring. And essentially what that meant was the original partners would maintain that exact same set of sharing rules that we had agreed to originally, and the Russians would keep what they brought, which meant their allocation of the station was essentially their elements. That was viewed as an initial allocation, and we could trade across the interfaces. And we've done that over the years. We've arranged deals where the Russians would provide propellant to the station, and we would give them power, different kinds of trades. The negative aspect of agreeing to that was it created a segmented operation. And in fact, at the Johnson Space Center level where the program was working, they were referring to the U.S. operating segment and the Russian segment. And that drives a different behavior and mentality about separate operations, not fully integrated. And so we had to counter that approach with really underscoring that the crew activities, the crew training, how the crew worked was a single integrated crew, that we weren't having side-by-side stations up there operating, but a single program operating. And that is, in fact, how it works today. But that was the basis of extensive and very difficult negotiations to get to that point. Right. Another key aspect was the affordability, the operations cost for the station. So we had agreed from the beginning with the partners that we would share in the operating costs. So the question first was which operating costs should be shared, and we used that formula of percentages, but percentage of what? So we came up with common systems operations cost. And so what are the things that, for example, mission control and other activities contribute to the common benefit of the station? Those are valid costs to share. There may be other things that are really uniquely for one partner that don't need to be shared. But there was a lot of discussion about what were those valid costs that were common, and then how do you make sure that those costs are driven down over time. Especially for a long-term program, you have other activities you want to do, priorities change, and so there's a lot of pressure to reduce those costs. There's also a view in most nations that you don't want to send money abroad. And so if you can trade off services and goods for those operating costs, even better. But even if you're doing that, you want the costs to be down so you don't have to give as much in order to get the benefits. We have, in fact, driven the costs down over the year, but that is a subject of continued attention and something that all of the partners need to pay very close attention to, especially for their Congress, their Parliament, all of the folks who are providing appropriations. All right, so with regard to future exploration programs, that affordability, the long-term operations, will be very important. How do you sustain a program for the long term, especially as you go through different political cycles? So attention to operations costs, how to keep them down, how to manage them, how to share them, those are all elements that need to be addressed as the program is designed and the agreements are negotiated.